Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers, and certainly hope you're enjoying your weekend. Later, how carefully is that federal COVID money that's flowing into Kentucky, and in some cases straight to city halls and courthouses, being tracked? State Auditor Mike Harmon will join us to talk about keeping watch on those tax dollars later. But first, every 10 years, the U.S. Constitution requires state leaders to sit down with new census numbers and redraw district lines in a way that makes sure people are fairly represented. The Founding Fathers may not have intended it, but in many cases, in many states, it becomes a very political process. How the lines are drawn can have a major impact on who is elected to represent a district in Washington or Frankfort, or even at the local courthouse level. The Kentucky chapter of the League of Women Voters is calling for a transparent process when lawmakers draw the lines at the state capitol. Dee Pregliasco is joining us now from the League of Women Voters to talk some about that. Welcome. We appreciate you being with us very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How did the League get involved in this? I know very early on we were hearing from you about the need to be transparent.
Well, I think this, Bill, is what's happened. The growth of partisanship and gridlock throughout the country has alerted people, and so the National League since 2007 has been active in this area, and then the local Kentucky League, we issued a report in early 2017, particularly after the lawsuit and all the trouble that happened after the 2010 census. So that's why we've been pushing this open, transparent, and public input process.
So what is the League of Women Voters really asking for as state lawmakers get ready to draw up these lines? For what all we know, they may be at this point doing some of that, in private before there may be a special legislative session at some point to actually make it law.
Right. Well, first, what we did both in last year's General Assembly and this year's, ask for a law to provide for an advisory commission. It would take a constitutional amendment to have an independent commission, which means that it would take the decision away from the legislators. We said, okay, let's just have an advisory commission, have public hearings, let everybody draw maps if they want to. And we actually purchased Maptitude, which is the same technology and program that the Legislative Research Commission uses to draw maps. And we've been drawing maps. We think many of them can be fairer, can be simpler. Some are okay. And of course, there are going to be huge population shifts in Kentucky that are going to affect how these maps are drawn.
Right. The Founding Fathers may not have envisioned it this way, but redistricting has become very political in most states over the years, and as you said, continues to grow more and more so. Ideally, what factors do you think lawmakers really should consider when they draw up the district lines?
Well, the one that they don't want to consider, which we think is important, is that they shouldn't look at the incumbents. They should draw the lines based upon the communities. They have to follow the Voting Rights Act. They have to follow, obviously, the Kentucky Constitution, fair and equal. The Baker versus Carr, one person, one vote. And then we should have compact districts. We should have communities of interest, and this includes racial communities of interest. And let me give you a very quick example. In Hopkinsville, it's a very compact city. They have 3 representatives. In other words, they divided up that city. To us, that doesn't make any sense. And we think those communities, wherever they are in the state, should have a say and should be able to talk about what works best for us.
So if the situation exists that you can have one county have one voice, you think that is better than being split up as so many of our districts are?
Well, it's not just one county, but think about it as some cities, because Hopkinsville obviously is in a large county.
Yeah.
The problem is with the population shifts to the I-75 and the I-65 corridors, there's going to have to be a lot of redrawing, and there'll be a lot of counties in eastern Kentucky and western Kentucky that are going to have to be lumped with other people. But remember, we have 100 representatives and 38 senators, so it's a matter of particularly with representatives, it's going to be hard. It's going to be very hard.
Well, let's talk. Yeah. Let's talk about the congressional just for a moment. We do know there has been, and these numbers, preliminary numbers reveal, a substantial population shift in Kentucky. Many rural areas are seeing the numbers slip. People are clearly moving to urban and suburban areas. So an area like the 5th District, long represented by Republican Hal Rogers, may have to take in a lot of territory, while a district like the 6th, where Lexington is, could become much smaller, right?
Yes, and if you look at that congressional map now, you'll see one, we call it, there's sort of a dragon, and then there's like a dog with some ears. That needs to be redone. What happened is they took Owensboro out of the 1st District, and Owensboro really ought to be in the 1st District. Instead, the 1st District goes all the way from the Mississippi River all the way over to Hal Rogers' Eastern Kentucky District. That doesn't make any sense, even with all the numbers.
And then when it comes to the legislative districts, you have some that the geography will be pretty interesting as far as how far and difficult for some of those lawmakers to access all parts of their district, especially on the Senate side.
Yes, one of our goals is that these districts be drawn so that doesn't happen. And let me give you an example. There's a southeastern part of Jefferson County, a little tiny area that's connected all the way with the senatorial district down to Casey County. Again, that doesn't make sense. If you look at the representative groups throughout the state and the Senate, you'll see these ribbons, long counties, like 4, 5, 6 counties connected. That doesn't help people access their representative, and it doesn't help the representative either. But again, we don't want them to protect incumbents, and we think obviously that would be one of the goals. And both Democrats and Republicans, the Democrats did this for about 40 years and didn't do it fairly. And then in 2010, the Republicans controlled the Senate and they made mistakes, and the Democrats controlled the House. They made mistakes, and then that's why there was the lawsuit, because they weren't within the 5% range that they should have been.
Well, Dee, you sound as though you're idealistic on one hand, but practical on the other in realizing what's going on here. So the temptation. Those with control of the process know they can substantially affect the outcome of elections by altering the makeup of a district. How does that not happen when they do these things behind closed doors and then eventually present it and have it voted on?
Well, that's why we want it to be open, and we want the proposed maps to be produced early so people can see them and not, vote on a map that you've just seen, for an hour. So if it's open, if there's public input, then there can be some real discussions about that. And you're right, there's this temptation that, okay, they did it to us, let's do it to them. What we've tried to say, and we've met with legislators of both parties and are continuing to meet with legislators of both parties and saying, look, be the good guys, do it right, think about good government, regardless of what happened in the past, no revenge, do it right. We did a good job with our election reform. The League didn't support everything in it, but it was overall good compared to other states. So let's show the rest of the country we can do that as far as redistricting.
We do have the good fortune of not losing a congressional district this year, so it is just a matter of drawing the lines and not having to maybe put incumbents against each other and that sort of thing, which we did after the, for instance, 1990 census. Yes.
Actually, there was a lawsuit in 2012, but there have been basically 6 or 7 lawsuits throughout Kentucky's history where it wasn't done the way it should be done.
And, the courts then say, go back to work and redraw. So your point is get it right the first time, right?
Yes, exactly. What we had proposed with our advisory commission was, let us work on this with public hearings all over the state, give it to the legislators. If they don't like it, we can go back, we can tweak it. They have the ultimate say, and we understand that. But again, if you're part of the process, even if you don't absolutely love the outcome, I think that people are much more satisfied. I think we know for sure it will keep the gridlock from happening as bad as it is right now, and hopefully cut down on the partisanship if people are involved. And these are our representatives. We don't want them to draw the maps in the basement of the state capitol at the last minute without public input.
Dee, what has the reception been as the league has gotten loud on this and public, and you're making an appearance like this, calling for it publicly? Do you think you're being heard?
Well, I think we are. The first responses we got was, well, where were you when the Democrats were in control? And what I have said to all of them is, look, we all should have been paying attention. We weren't. That's our bad, but let's go forward and make it right. So because they're meeting with us and talking about our maps, in fact, we bought Maptitude, like I said, and have drawn some maps, even based on the 2010 numbers. And as soon as all the numbers come out in September, we're going to redraw them based upon those new numbers. And what we say is, all right, so look at some maps. Look at this with some public input. Let's do the right thing. They're supposedly going to have some listening tours. We have not heard any kind of schedule. There was a hearing on the 15th, June the 15th. We were couldn't get on the agenda, but they did accept our report. In other words, we made a statement and report, and we hope to be on the agenda in both July and August to talk about all these details. So I think the door is not completely closed. We just want them to not, shall we say, get to that revenge point. Like, okay, we're going to do exactly what they did to us.
If people want to be involved in the process and in your efforts, how can they get more information, find out what's going on, and stay informed?
Well, there's several ways. One, we've been giving now, of course, because of COVID, PowerPoints all over the state to citizens groups, church groups, individual groups, chambers of commerce, Rotaries, you name it. So if you have a group that would like to be more informed, we'll be glad to meet with them. Now we're meeting in person again, but we can still do it by PowerPoint. At the same time, call your legislator and say, we want this to be an open process. And then we have I say unofficial, we have a petition for people to sign to say, make it open and transparent. And it's not, one of those that's going to follow some sort of law, but the idea is to get it to the legislators. Look, people want an open process, transparent. Let's have these good maps, fair maps.
All right, we have your website on the screen now, lwvky.org. Dee, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it, and a good conversation, and we'll see what happens, right?
Right, thank you, and call on us again.
All right, thank you, we'll do. And we hope you'll stay with us here on Kentucky Newsmakers. State Auditor Mike Harmon will be here in a moment. What's going on with that money that's flowing in from Washington to Kentucky? We'll get some answers to that when we come back. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. Billions of dollars in federal aid is flowing into Kentucky right now. Some of it is being allocated by the Republican-led legislature, and some of it is going directly to local cities and counties. Strings are attached, and if the rules aren't followed, governments could be forced to return the money to Washington. State Auditor Mike Harmon says he thought this would be a good time to let Kentuckians know more about what's coming and how it can be spent. Auditor Mike Harmon joining us now. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me in, Bill.
So the money's flowing.
Money's flowing.
The Treasury Department at the federal level has issued guidance. What did you hope to achieve by sending out a bulletin from your office about that money?
Sure. Well, what we did is from time to time we will release, and we kind of started under my administration, what we call data bulletins, which is just taking information that's normally readily available to people, distilling it down, and putting it in a format that people can easily understand and see. We work, in this particular case, we work directly with the state budget director. We appreciate his efforts in getting us the information. We kind of quantified it and put it in a little bit of a better format. And I just think it's important for taxpayers and the citizens of Kentucky to know how their dollars are being spent, because even though these are coming in from federal, it's still their dollars.
How much money is coming to Kentucky?
Well, Kentucky as a whole received through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is just a small segment of the overall CARES Act, but the state as a whole received $1.732 billion, and that way that was portioned out. The state directly got $1.599 billion, and Louisville, because they had a population of greater than 500,000, was also a prime recipient. They got separately $133 million. So that was portioned out, and then obviously The General Assembly was not in session during that time frame, so the governor and his staff worked to apportion that out accordingly.
And then the money that's coming directly to the local governments, that again, it comes with guidance, with strings attached, but yet there seems to still be some confusion out there on the part of cities and counties what they can and can't do with the money.
Yeah, and there's a lot of confusion. This particular data bulletin did not look at the ARPA money. It just looked at the Coronavirus Relief Fund money. And in that particular case, there wasn't necessarily a requirement to pass that down to the cities and to the counties. However, thankfully the governor and his staff made a decision to expend about 20% of that, forwarded on to the counties and cities. And as you mentioned, early on there was very little guidance, through the CARES Act. Our people went directly, worked with the Department of Local Government, KCO. We even taught some classes on normal basic controls, things like, in a normal course, if a county or a city receives $750,000 or federal funds or more, they expend that in a fiscal year. They have to do what's known as a single audit, some greater controls and looking a little bit more deeply. So we kind of went in and helped teach some of the areas in that regard.
With this American Rescue Plan Act is out there now, the new money that is coming in, do you think the cities and county governments should be careful to keep that directly in line with health and safety issues, or places are looking at it different ways? Lexington is considering an aquatics center with part of that. Louisville looked at the possibility of spending millions on the tourism promotion and eventually backed out of that. What would you advise those cities and counties to do?
Well, in this particular case, for the coronavirus relief funds, as opposed to ARPA has a little different guidance. On those specifically, there were specific guidelines, with the exception of, say, like public health and public safety. It had to be something that wasn't previously budgeted. So if you'd already had it in a budget and it wasn't in public health or public safety, you really are not supposed to be using the funds for that. In this particular case, I'm assuming those items are not previously budgeted. However, I would encourage them, especially for the new ARPA money, for that money, you've got up until 2024 to be able to utilize those funds. So it's always better that if you don't have to expend it immediately, to take a little time and to give a lot of thought to it before you just run out and expend it.
Have you seen anything yet that concerns you about the spending? I know what you've been doing is letting citizens know what's out there. But I take it you will also be taking a close look at how it eventually is spent.
Correct. Well, part of these funds, even though this report in of itself is not an audited report, it's just issuing the information, parts of this had been audited, through the 2020 fiscal year, and then of course additional funds are being expended through fiscal year 2021. We released, our statewide single audit volume 1 and volume 2 a few months ago at different times, and we've already looked at some of this, and as you remember, there was a lot of problems within the Office of Unemployment Insurance at that time, so there was some concerns on how that was issued out, specifically when they put in place what's known as auto pay, paid out roughly $655 million with controls taken off. It was probably well intended to try to get the money out, but it was paid in an environment that was highly subject to fraud. So that in and of itself is a great concern.
And we had a lot of fraud.
And we have had a lot of fraud.
And
yes.
you highlighted some of that and looked at that. We know about all the problems with the system and the delayed payments. Some have now within the administration testified before the legislature and indicated it could be years before this unemployment system can be corrected. Do you see it that way?
Well, specifically the fraud, I think it is going to take a while to dig out from that, because there's a lot of things that we have to chase. Now, from the standpoint of getting the new system up and the system in place, certainly that may take a little while, but I mean, people right now have already, many of them still have waited 12 to 13 months or more without any unemployment. So it's imperative, at least from that aspect, that we get those individuals worked out as we, complete and work on the system going forward.
Mr. Auditor, you see the help wanted signs across Kentucky as all of us do. Mixed reaction, though, to Governor Beshear's incentive plan to try to lure people back to work. The payments come with conditions,
right?
But some are out there saying, should tax dollars go at all to try to lure people to work?
Well, I mean, my personal opinion, if you're not going to shut down the additional incentives, that $300 a week, it doesn't take, a lot of, I'm a mathematician, but it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that $300 a week through September, is approximately $3,600. $3,600 is greater than $1,500. But, I think in general, from a standpoint, paying people to work, you've got people that have gone to work every day, our frontline providers, our grocery store people, and just everybody, hospital workers, just everybody that has gone to work every day, and yet they're not receiving a portion of this incentive if you're going to do that.
Is that an area that eventually you will look at those expenditures?
Yeah, I mean, we will always look if there's expenditures like that. At a minimum, it would be looked at in our statewide single audit of Kentucky, maybe even at a higher level. But if we see a great amount of concern, then certainly we would look a little more in depth.
Local governments are now, and state government for that matter, are emerging from a time when they did so much business over Zoom and phone calls if they could, and city halls and courthouses were closed to the public. Do you fear that period of time lessened public scrutiny of what was going on, or the ability to ask tough questions, and now Kentuckians may be out of practice when it comes to that?
Well, I think it's important. Of course, I myself love to be in person. I prefer to do this. I mean, I love visiting with you on Zoom, but I love to be in person because you can kind of read people a little bit more. And you were talking about some of the interviews. It would be, a little bit more difficult, but we still did it. To be honest with you, I certainly want to thank our county officials who worked diligently to make sure that we received, state as well, Steve, information during that time frame. We had people teleworking. For the most part, we didn't miss a lick. We kept going and doing our work. But I think it's much better, especially if you're doing those interviews or anything along that line, to be in person because some people may not be willing to share as much information, over an electronic system that might be, in their mind, elsewhere monitored.
I mean, sometimes people just would come and raise a question before a fiscal court or a city council, and that sets off, looking into something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Political question before you go. On this program about a year ago or so, you indicated you are looking at the 2023 governor's race.
Correct.
What's the reaction been to that? Do you continue to be interested in pursuing that?
Continue to be. Of course, we're still out working hard for the Auditor of Public Accounts, doing our day-to-day job, but certainly I'm termed out, so I am still leaning heavy and likely to head in that direction. My guess is you will probably see something in the coming months to be more clarified that position. So,
you no longer have to choose a running mate before the primary, but that could work two ways. That could also mean that somebody who finishes back in the pack in the primary could potentially be a lieutenant governor candidate.
Exactly.
If that should be the case, might you be interested in that?
I would certainly entertain that if for some reason, if I was not selected at the top position. The other thing that it does, it certainly allows, individuals to kind of get out ahead of the game. Years ago when we repealed public financing, the governor's race, we accidentally repealed the gubernatorial exploratory committee. So in some ways, it goes a little further, but in some ways, the way that they've passed the legislation now, it actually almost acts as a gubernatorial exploratory committee as well.
State Auditor Mike Harmon, thanks for coming by as always. Appreciate it very much. And we hope you'll stay with us. We will be back on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. The airline industry was hit hard, almost grounded by the pandemic. And now a new set of problems is canceling flights and frustrating customers. Our chief national political analyst, Greta Van Susteren, explains.
Hello, I'm Greta Van Susteren, and here is your full court Fast break. For more than a year, the pandemic disrupting travel. Now business people and tourists are itching to get out. But the airline industry is struggling to meet the soaring demand. Is it ready? Across-the-board airlines slashing and delaying flights. And for the first half of July, the nation's largest carrier, American Airlines, preemptively cutting about 1,000 flights. Some airlines blame these cancellations on the current labor shortage. During the pandemic, airlines offered pilots early retirement buyouts in an effort to save money and get people off the payroll. Now they are scrambling to replace those pilots. Delta announced it will be hiring 75 pilots between now and August. Delta also says by next summer it will add 1,000 pilots. As for furloughed pilots, they would be back in the air, but for months they were not flying or training on simulators. That means their certifications lapsed. Recertification takes time, and it cannot be done fast enough to meet the current spike in demand. But here's what troubles many flyers or would-be receivers of cargo from those planes. The federal government, in response to the pandemic, gave the airline industry more than $50 billion in taxpayer-financed grant bailouts. That money was meant to keep airlines and their workers afloat so they would be ready to snap back when travel rebounded. So why weren't they prepared for the inevitable uptick in travel? We await their answer. But we do know for the next few months you can expect rising airfares, changing flight schedules, and inconvenient reroutes. Want more full court press? Tune in Sundays. We bring politics home, covering the national stories that impact you.
And remember, you can catch Full Court Press with Greta Van Susteren this morning at 11:30 on WKYT. Already looking ahead to next week's edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. One topic we'll discuss, the opioid crisis worsening during the pandemic. We do want to thank you for joining us for this edition. Now, I'll be returning to the morning news for this week ahead, so we'll see you bright and early on WKYT News, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.